high school.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
Those are mine.
Close them. And then just tuck the rest of them.
So I'll start just by asking a question, like introduce yourself and then kind of take us through the beginning of your story.
Great.
So go for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't grow up in a Christian home.
I grew up in a Christian home. I went to church, you know, for the probably up until 16 years old.
I grew up in a single-parent household with just my mom and my brother.
I grew up in a dysfunctional home, I guess you could say.
I mean, we were like Long Island Catholics, so we would go for Easter Sunday and then we would go for Christmas Eve services, and that was about it. My parents were very, you know, religion is whatever you want it to be, so choose your own way, which I valued at the time.
My mom got saved before I was born, and my dad was a alcoholic and user. So that dynamic between the two was interesting, to say the least.
We were raised Christian. My mom brought us to church every Sunday, implemented the word, and just turning to Jesus as our support and our provider. I can't really think of a time where I didn't love God or didn't worship Him. Grew up knowing that He was my best friend and still believe that.
I went to Christian school. My parents married still to this day. I got kicked out of Christian school in 6th grade and I went to public school. I got suspended a lot. I started smoking cigarettes and smoking weed. I got kicked out the whole year. 9th grade, I got caught smoking. Around that time, I wasn't in school, so I was hanging out with my friend, you know, my friend's parents. I was hanging out, and they gave me like painkillers, and you know, I drank with them, and just developed bad habits. Went back to school. I got into a lot of fights. I didn't have a good relationship with my dad, and I think that caused me to act out a lot more. All throughout high school, I was in and out of school. I had to spend an extra year because I missed so much time. Didn't go to college. Went to work with my dad, and that just made our relationship so much worse, being stuck together. And he, you know, some people would say abusive, but he definitely was verbally abusive. You know, I got hit a lot when I was younger, but the words hurt worse than anything.
So yeah, my dad was never really around, and I was okay with that. I had my big brother, and that was the man in the house. So my mom, being a single parent, she had to work 2 jobs, and she worked hard on the weekends and stuff. And there was just one particular weekend that she had to work a night shift at the hospital she was working at. And typically she would drop me off at my aunt's house so I could be babysat by my cousins. And my brother had to work as well, so nobody wanted to watch me. But that day I was playing with my friend, and I didn't want to leave. You know, just being a kid, I was 6, was having fun. You don't want to leave when you're having fun. So she was my best friend at the time. Her mom was like, "You can leave her with us, it's fine. You don't have to worry, we'll watch her." And my mom, you know, just being a mom and wanting to make your kid happy, she's like, "Okay, you can stay, you know, and Garrett will pick you up after." My brother will pick me up after he got out of work, which would be around like 11:30. He worked at a supermarket. So I stayed and was hanging out. We were playing, and then it was time for us to go to bed. And her mom was, you know, to make sure that we both went to sleep, would put us down separately. She put her daughter down first, obviously, and I was waiting in the living room, the TV room, with her uncle.
My father was an addict, alcohol and drug user, and that kind of was a product of his environment and what he grew up in and what he knew. And through that, my mom did the best that she could to raise me the best that she could. When I was 6, my parents got divorced. there was a long-standing thing of spousal abuse and everything that kind of comes along with both of those worlds kind of colliding. So through that, my mom left my dad when we were 6, and we went out on our own, and for a decent amount of time it was just me and my mom. And during that time I would go see my dad on the weekends, so I lived most of my life for a long time with kind of identity struggle between the two worlds and how polar opposite they were. During the week at my mom's, I was going to church. I went to a Christian school. From the outside looking in, I had a pretty decent life. And then on the weekends at my dad's, it was kind of a free-for-all, do whatever you want. My cousins lived in the same house as my dad, and they were like my big brothers at the time. They both got high, and at a very young age, they kind of forced me to get high with them. It started when I was like 8 or 9. By the time I was like 12 or 13, I was doing it on my own just because I didn't feel like dealing with them trying to force me to do it, and I kind of started to enjoy it on my own. And right around the time I was like 15 or 16, my two lives kind of started to bleed into each other.
So my parents were very kind of your stereotypical Long Island Catholics. They would take us to Easter services and Christmas Eve services, but that was pretty much it. You know, we kind of got into the sports when we were younger, and so Sundays quickly didn't become important to us, and we didn't really have real relationships with God, and neither did my parents. So their whole motto was kind of, you know, you choose your own path, however you want to go, we'll honor it. So I didn't grow up knowing Jesus. I kind of had this vague idea of him as this guy in the sky who, you know, just controlled things from a distance. So I grew up in a normal home, normal life. I was really involved in music and with dance. So I spent most of my time outside of school. So literally from the time school would end to about 9:30 at night, I was at the dance studio, I was doing music lessons or anything like that. So I was decent with it, and I was the only one who played my instrument. So about 8th grade, the high school teacher at the time just kind of took me under his wing and quote unquote started mentoring me. And it quickly turned abusive.
The day that I graduated high school, I moved out of my mom's house and into my dad's house. We got high together. We sold drugs together. It was kind of just like having a best friend who was quote-unquote your dad. Right after high school, I got involved with a girl who was addicted to opiates or prescription painkillers. Right away, I kind of got involved with that, and within a month, I was physically addicted to him. And it just kind of spiraled down from there. It got to the point where I was like 20 pounds lighter than I was. I wasn't really eating much. I was kind of just getting high all the time. Through all this happening, my dad had been diagnosed with cancer several years back, and it got to a point when I was around 20 where he had gotten real sick. And he was bad, and he was kind of in a really dark place too. We were both using opiates and heroin together, and there was one day where he was waiting for me to come home, and he was at the house, and he had picked up drugs before I got home, and he used, and he actually overdosed and died. And through all that, it kind of put me into a really, really dark place because just the relationship that we had, the last conversation I had with him was us fighting with each other. So there's just a whole culmination of things that kind of put me into a really dark spot. When he passed, he had life insurance, and he left me a little chunk of money, and over a period of 4 months, I spent like 40 grand getting high. I was obviously addicted to opiates, so that was a big thing for me. I had always liked doing coke, so I got into smoking crack. My parents, my mom and my dad at the time weren't able to be around me. They told me that they didn't want to see me. And this at this point was the first time that I was really alone. So I was just doing a lot of drugs on my own, sitting at the house, feeling terrible about myself. There was one particular night where I was getting high on my own. I was sitting there. I remember sitting on the couch, and I started feeling sick, and I knew that if I didn't kind of go make myself throw up, that something bad was going to happen. I could have that feeling, that overwhelming feeling. As I stood up to go to the bathroom, everything kind of got black, and I passed out, and I woke up, I don't know how long later, and there was throw up on the floor, and I had overdosed.
So it quickly turned into emotional and physical and mental abuse, and then in my junior and senior year of high school, it turned into extreme sexual abuse. you know, you hear about it, it's a statistic, but you never really think that it's going to happen to you. And even when it was happening, I never wanted to admit it to myself that there was something intrinsically wrong with this situation. And so when I graduated high school, I tried to put as much distance as I possibly could between just myself and New York. And so I moved out to LA. I started drinking pretty much every night, and I got into drugs, and I was just trying to fill this emptiness that was inside. And so I partied pretty much every single night when I was out in school, to the point where I pretty much almost got kicked out of my university in LA, and my mom told me I had to come home. My life back in New York didn't really change. I was in and out of relationships. I continued to just get into drugs, get into alcohol. I was doing pills, I was smoking a lot of weed, and I was just digging myself deeper into this pit of numbness, and I didn't want to even think about what happened. I didn't want to approach it. Anytime I would start to think about it, I would just start crying. I remember going into this crazy just spiral of depression, thinking, you know, what is my purpose here? Like, my purpose was just to be this like girl who's abused, this girl who's, you know, just used and like cast aside and thrown out.
So around that time, I really started getting into, you know, like club drugs, and I was selling it now. I was selling coke and ecstasy, weed, pills. I stopped working altogether. Just was on a downward path. I was selling drugs in the clubs that I was going to, and just no regard for anybody but myself. I was really selfish. And then I think it was April. It was Easter weekend. I had gotten a DUI. I had to spend Easter weekend in the precinct. Actually, that night that I got home from the precinct, I did a few drug deals, so it didn't know. I guess it didn't affect me that much. You know, I never stopped doing the drugs. I never stopped selling them. All up until about 23, I was just in a party mode. Coming home at 6 in the morning, at least 3 times a week on the weekends. Tons of cocaine and ecstasy and weed. That was like a weekly thing.
We were just waiting for her to fall asleep so then I can go to bed. And while we were just sitting down, he started to talk to me, asking me, Bugs Bunny was playing on the TV. He was like, asking me if I liked the cartoon, and you know what my favorite thing was about it and all that, just having conversation. And then he sat me on his lap. And to make a long story short, you know, when things like that, you're put in an atmosphere like that, you can only assume what happens. I was molested. I don't know how else to say it other than that way. I know there's words like sexual abuse or your innocence stolen from you, but I feel like the word molested has to be said because testimonies aren't meant to make people comfortable. It's meant to give people hope. Because testimonies aren't meant to make people comfortable. It's meant to give people hope.
There was one night where I was all alone once again. I was in my bathroom and I was crawling back to my bedroom to go try and get in bed. And I made it into my room and I was just getting ready to crawl into the bed, and I pulled myself up, and as I pulled myself up, I kind of flopped over onto my knees. And I was just sitting there, and it was the first time that I'd really talked to God in a long time. And it was, as I cried out to God, I said, God, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what to do, and I need you. I need your help. And like I said, this was the first time that I ever truly had the desire to stop, all just because I wanted to. Every other time I tried to get clean was because I needed to I wasn't going to get kicked out of my house, or because my mom wanted me to, or because a friend told me I needed to. This is the first time that I really need to do it for myself. And in saying that, it was the first time that I ever heard the voice of God, and it wasn't like that big booming voice like you see in the movies or anything like that. It was just a thought that popped into my head, and I knew the thought wasn't for me, and the simplicity of the thought was the best part about it, and it was just stop. Just stop what you're doing. And I knew it wasn't from my own mind, I knew it was from God. And the story changes from that point.
My Tori had called me, and she bought a plane ticket for me to come out to visit her to where she was living at the time. And I ended up getting just very drunk that one night with her. We went out, and I just lost control. And the only thing I remember from that night is her praying for me and her just consistently saying to me, Jesus loves you and he has so much more for you than you could ever imagine. And so I came home, and we were in Oklahoma, so I came home to New York, and the only church that I knew was in the city. And so I tried everything that Sunday I possibly could to get out of going. I still didn't want to meet God. I still didn't want to meet this, guy who would let this happen to me. And I just remember walking into church, and there was this welcome home sign. And the second I saw it, I just started crying, because just the peace and the presence of God just surrounded me in that place in such an amazing way. And just the people there were so great and so loving and so amazing. And so I made the decision that day, it was August 25th, 2013, to just believe in Jesus and just have a relationship with him.
I asked my grandpa if I could get on a softball team, and he said he could get me in with the church. So he left out the detail that I have to go to church in order to play softball. So I wasn't really happy about that, and I had to make the decision if I'm going to go to church or not, if it's worth it. I ended up sticking it out. Ended up making good friends with everybody on the team. One day at church, this girl came up to me. She had just told me that God put something on her mind to tell me. That she gave me a verse. It was a Bible verse in John. It really hit home with me. And she asked, I don't know why that God told me to give this to you. It might apply to you in your friendships, your job, or relationship. And right around then is definitely when I had my first encounter with God. Because it just totally hit me. And like a ton of bricks, it hit me, and I really felt it that day. And that day, I decided that I want to have a relationship with God.
When I was in bed, I was too scared to walk back outside because I didn't know what was going to happen. I accidentally wet the bed, and I didn't move from my spot until my brother came and picked me up. And I didn't tell anybody anything. I didn't tell my brother anything. But it was like in that moment, he's never done this before. When he picked me up, he put me on his back. And it was like in that moment, the Lord restored everything that needed to be restored in that moment. My trust in men, my vulnerability was restored. I just learned that only a few years ago. I just knew I loved the Lord so much that he was too good, that I'm more than the bad things that happened to me. And he's just such a good God, and he just loves so strongly. And that not what happened to me was okay, or that he didn't care, but he cared more for me in that single moment by just having me go on my brother's back, something that my brother never did before. He never put me on his back, and that's not an exaggeration, and he never really did again. But the fact that the Lord just, even in that moment, took care of me that quickly, that instantly, that I didn't have to go down a path that would keep me from him. He's the Father that's always going to take care of me.
There's literally nothing like the grace of God. There's literally nothing like his love. And just my life's testimony is a testimony to his pursuit of me. He just kept searching for me, and there were people along the way who would tell me about him, but he just never gave up. And it's such a beautiful just story of his love, I think. 4 years later, after being saved, I would never expect to be sitting here saying, hey, I'm a pastor at a local church now. I think if you had asked me that 4 years ago, I would have said, you're crazy, it's never gonna happen. But here I am, and you just get to do what God's doing as your job, and there's nothing like it. It's amazing.
After being clean 4 months later, I met my wife. Me and her walked through a lot of really tough times together. But through that now, 6 years later, I have a awesome marriage. I have a great job. I have a great group of friends. I serve at a church that I just absolutely love. I have a great relationships with my family now. God has just totally and completely turned my life around and blessed me in so many ways, and I feel so undeserving of everything that he's given to me, but it just shows that God's faithfulness and His grace is so freely offered to us.
Now, I write worship songs. I sing for the Lord. I am currently writing a worship album just because it's just something that He put in my heart, because He created me to worship, and we were all created to worship, but me specifically, I know that that's my calling in life, is just to worship the Lord with everything that I have, because no matter what's thrown at me, no matter what I face, no matter what trial or difficulty, I just know that when it's just me and Him, there's a level of intimacy that just can't be taken by any past hurt or anything that anybody's ever done to me.
He wants you. He wants you more than you could ever imagine. He just wants you to make that commitment to Him. You stay in one direction, pointing towards Him, and things will open up that you would never think, possible. And I could vouch for that. People here could vouch for that. It's true, You guys got to try it for yourself.